Welcome to the Solution Nation podcast. My name is Sean Snowday, and I'm the president of Solution Nation. Solution Nation is dedicated to providing a platform for investors to learn about Israel's most dynamic public and private companies. We interview lead venture capitalists, Wall Street analysts, investment bankers, and managers of incubators and accelerators. Today's topic is the importance of Israeli Desertech. We will be interviewing Nicole Stroh, the executive director at Mirage Foundation. We will explore the if and why Israeli Desertech companies can access funding offered by international or European development funding sources, and how problems with deserts can lead to problems elsewhere. Please remember that all content provided on the Solution Nation podcast and website is for educational purposes only. Nothing shall be construed as investment advice. Investment decisions shall not be made based on information, written, verbal, or otherwise, posted or spoken on Solution Nation. Conduct your own research or consult with your own investment advisors before making investment decisions. So here's my good friend, the host of the show, and the CEO of Solution Nation, David Wanatik.
Welcome to Solution Nation. I'm David Wanatik. Very excited to present today's program to you. The focus of today's session is Desertech, desert technology. Speaking on this issue, very pleased to welcome Nicole Stroh. Nicole is the executive director at the Mirage Foundation. Thank you for joining us, Nicole.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get into desert technology, I want to learn a little bit more about your background and career, and then we'll go into the Mirage Foundation. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Nicole.
Sure. So I'm originally from Colombia. I moved to Israel in 2009, and I studied in the United States. I spent many years in my life in the United States, kind of got to work also in New York and Latin America and here in Israel. And my background has always been around impact, whether I've been on the side of the philanthropic side, on the side of nonprofits, and also a lot of trying to bring everyone around a lot of the interface with business and impact.
Great, thank you. So we don't get to talk to very many people from Colombia. So maybe tell us a little bit about the Jewish community in Colombia.
Sure. So my great-grandparents arrived to Colombia right before World War II. The community is about 50-50 Ashkenazi Sephardic. It's a very small Jewish community, very united, most of them concentrated in Bogota, the capital city. I would say about 4,000 Jews in all of Colombia, so it's very small. And it's unfortunately, around the time that I left for college is really the exodus when most Jews left, not because of anti-Semitism. In fact, Jews have always been pretty welcomed among the Colombians, but mostly because of the general security situation, instability. But I still go often and visit.
Great. And then maybe you can say a few words about the Colombian or Latin American community in Israel.
Yes. So Israelis always think, they hear me speaking Spanish, they always assume I'm Argentinian, even though our accents are very, very different. And the reason is because most of the Spanish-speaking Jews in Israel are from Argentina. That's the largest, and I guess it's the largest community anyway in Latin America. But there's really Jews from all over Latin America, and we really get together, Venezuelans, Bolivians, Peruvians, Costa Ricans, Panamanians. We also have our own Maccabi games in Latin America and within Colombia. So that's when a lot of young people will get together. And because these countries have so much in common culturally, it was always kind of an extension of their own inner communities. And most of them are concentrated in the Ranana, Farsaba area. That's where you can see most of the Spanish speaking. Now we have also a rising Brazilian community, but they speak Portuguese, so it's a little bit different.
And do you know how large those communities are, the Spanish-speaking and Portuguese-speaking communities are in Israel?
No, I think, no, I'm not sure. I would say the Colombians would be about maybe 40 families of Colombians, and I would think it's similar numbers for the smaller communities that I mentioned. For the Brazilians, it's probably a lot more. I would just want to say maybe 200 families, but I wouldn't be sure.
Okay, great. Now, perhaps you can introduce us to the Mirage Foundation.
Sure. So the Mirage Foundation is a private philanthropic foundation established by David and Laura Mirage. David and Laura came from Iran. They moved to the United States. And David and his brother Paul became big business people. They started a food factory called Chef America. They sold to Nestle in early 2000s. The Hot Pocket is pretty known in the States. And David they both became big philanthropists also in the United States and also in Israel. The foundation in Israel, which is what I'm in charge of, really has a wide spectrum of activities. We are what we call an operating foundation, a catalytic foundation, in a way that we're not only giving away grants, but we really take upon ourselves strategic issues long-term, and we try to see how our foundation can really ignite processes, bring in other partners, and try to create that snowball effect. And I think that the power of philanthropy in that sense in Israel is very significant because we have a very strong convening power. We know how to bring NGOs, we know how to bring government, we know how to bring the private sector. Everyone understands that our mission is only impact related. And as opposed to NGOs that might come across as if they're doing fundraising or they're trying to cover some of their operational costs. With foundations, it's easier because people understand that we are not trying to raise funds. We're trying to identify pivotal places where we can invest and we can bring other partners. And so we have 6 core projects. Just to tell you, like generally, we support lone soldiers with the Jewish Agency, a program called WINGS, International Lone Soldiers, about 2,500 from all over the world. We have also a program to strengthen the reserve units and really transform the reserves as a way to create more social cohesion and community building. We have a program that brings in young people and helps the elderly to use their smartphones and connect them, making them more independent. We have, since David and Laura came originally from Iran, the foundation originally 25 years ago focused on helping Iranian families coming to Israel. Over the years, it evolved and it's no longer about integration and immigration. It's more about how do we strengthen the Iranian heritage in Israel, women's empowerment. We work a lot with the women community. And the flagship program of the Mirage Foundation is the economic development of the Negev. The foundation is one of the earlier philanthropic endeavors, really realizing that without the Negev, there's no future for Israel. And it's really that, because if we're thinking about where will Israel be in the next 20 years, and Israel is not really thinking about 60% of its territory as a growth engine, then it's leaving a lot of opportunities untouched. And so the foundation, David Mirage himself, really about 20 years ago, began gathering people around him, raising awareness about the importance, trying to think about demographic growth, trying to reduce, if we're thinking about reducing the density in the Tel Aviv area, but also how we can really utilize the amazing resources in the Negev while ensuring that we're also protecting that beautiful desert. Ben-Gurion saw it very clearly. And then there was a couple of decades of neglect. And what we're really trying to do is make sure that now that neglect is transformed into, growth.
Okay, great. So the Mirage Foundation is doing great work. I like the part about the lone soldiers. I did Tiranud basic training a long time ago in Israel, and there was no support. I didn't have a blanket, so I'm glad it's different now. But anyway, when the Mirage Foundation makes an investment, do you typically set milestones similar to the way a venture capitalist would? And are those milestones more along the lines of making a social impact or financial or both?
So it really depends on the type of project. So just to give you an example, when it comes to our program to train the elderly, our milestones, there are a number of senior citizens participating in reduction of loneliness. So we go ahead and ask them, do you feel that thanks to the tools you're receiving, you feel more connected? And these are purely social milestones. In the case of the Negev, because we're on the space of economic development, then it's economic related indicators. We're talking about job creation, industry, companies that we're seeing, growth of startups. And soon I'll tell you more about what we're doing. I can give you concrete examples of how we measure that, which is really hard, especially in the short term. But it's definitely crucial for us to know if we're really hitting the targets.
Okay, so let's talk about the Negev. Maybe for those that don't know, tell us where it is in Israel, how big it is, how populated the Negev is.
So the Negev is all of that southern cone of Israel. It's, like I said, 60% of the territory, which is huge, about 14,000 square kilometers. And people count, they always ask me, what is Negev? So people count either from Ashdod to Eilat or Kiryat Gat to Eilat. Some people don't count Eilat or the Arava as part of the Negev. But bottom line, if we don't want to get too technical, it's all of the southern area. And it's mostly, if not all, a desert. There's about 1.1 million people, which is only about 13% of the population. So there's very low density. And out of that, there's about 250,000 Bedouins. The Bedouin community has been growing very significantly. They have a very high growth rate. And so it has become more and more obvious that in any plans for economic development, the Bedouin community also needs to be fully integrated.
Okay. So I'm not sure if this is still true, but I read years ago that if Israel didn't have the Negev, Israel would be the most concentrated country in the world population-wise. Is that true?
It's probably true, but what's sad is that, like I said, only 10% of Israelis are in the Negev. So we're already one of the most concentrated countries in the world. And what we're trying really to say to the young people, especially we saw in COVID, the advantages that we have with like remote work or reducing commute. So is that a lot of that density from the center could really move to the Negev. And how can we make Beersheba, which is the capital city of the Negev, a real metropolis that around it, you'll have more and more people living, talents, young, productive, educated people moving to the Negev as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Beersheba is a nice city, I think. I mean, that's where my mother-in-law lives. And I've seen a lot of growth over the years.
A lot. That's a great mayor, and it's growing a lot. Yeah.
Yes. So is the government, besides Desertech, is the government implementing policies to encourage more people to move to the Negev? Are they putting government offices or the military expanding into the Negev to draw people there?
So you just said it. The game changer is the fact that after many decades of talk, the IDF has finally been able to move, or it's in the process to approve the moving of its elite units, the tikshuv, the communications and the intelligence to the Negev. And that's a game changer in all levels. Also because there's, thousands of people moving there, or at least soldiers, but most importantly, because you have all these talents moving there. And so one of the things we're trying to see is how do we capitalize on this and make sure that these talents can support the community, the local community, and the other way around. How can the local community embrace all these people coming in to make sure that they feel at home, that they stay, that they're set roots and build their lives there? This is probably the most significant bold move by the government. I'll have to say that before that, not enough has been done, and it's been done, but on different government ministries, there hasn't been enough of top, bottom, organized effort to strengthen the Negev. But definitely this IDF move is a game changer.
Okay. What is going on in the Negev now ecologically? What is it like to live in the Negev? What are some of the problems that one would face living in the Negev desert?
So there's this very thin line between how do we protect those beautiful landscapes, the ecology, the biodiversity in the desert. We don't want to make the Negev become Tel Aviv. How do we protect it? In fact, a lot of the people that move to the Negev will tell you the reason they move is because they love the desert. They love the quiet, the silence. So that is something we don't want to destroy. But on the other hand, how do you create economic prosperity without destroying the landscape? And what was done in the past, which is really a shame, was attracting a lot of the large industry, traditional industry. So these big factories. And so it would create a lot of employment, but blue collar employment and a lot of pollution. And a lot of people criticized it, saying, you're turning the Negev as the backyard of Israel. And so that is definitely not what should be done. Now with Desertech, with tourism, the government and the people are starting to understand that there's a huge potential to transform that scarcity into innovation and assets for the world. As the world becomes more and more arid, it begins to be in desperate needs for some of the solutions that the Negev developed decades ago. And how do we translate those assets into economic prosperity without harming the Negev's biodiversity and ecology? There's no oil under the surface. There's no natural resources. It's really scarce. But what we have is human talent.
Okay. What are some of the problems that the other parts of Israel feel by being so close to the Negev desert? There's sandstorms. Are there other issues that happen in the desert that impact surrounding areas?
Yes. So in general, I'll speak specifically to the Negev and in general what it means to be in a desert. So yes, you have sandstorms. We have a lot of health issues related. Soroka Hospital has a huge database of desert population over generations, probably the largest data in the world in desert communities, what it means to be growing up with the dust and with the extreme temperatures and exposure to sun. So those are kind of the things that we see. Also the weather. I mean, on one hand, though, on Mitzpe Ramon, which is a higher area in the Negev, you could have you have less humidity. And in the evenings in the summer, you actually have it's much cooler than in Tel Aviv. But in the Negev, obviously, during the day and in the summer, the temperatures are very, very high. The problem that we're seeing is deserts have always existed throughout humanity. The problems that we're seeing are two. One is that deserts are expanding. Desertification as a phenomenon is expanding. And so that means that slowly, because of soil degradation and lack of water, areas that were semi-arid or arid are becoming desert. And so you can't grow anymore there. You can't. So that's one of the problems. And they say that the UN says that by 2025, which is around the corner, 1.8 billion people will experience absolute water scarcity. They say it's about 2,000 football fields per hour of fertile soil turning into dust because of soil degradation. So that's the first problem. And the second problem is areas that are not desertic, that are not arid, but that are experiencing desert-like symptoms, like 40 degrees, like we saw in London or in Canada. And these are communities, these are countries that have their infrastructure is not ready for that. They don't have air conditioning. So a lot of the desert adaptation that the Negev has to offer, because we're a Western country with top infrastructure, education, health services, and we've lived in the desert for millennia, we can teach some of these other countries that are only now starting to deal with these problems how to adapt better to climate change in a way.
Okay, so you'll talk about some of the solutions that your companies are pursuing, and you believe those solutions are largely portable to other deserts. Are there differences in the deserts, right? So the Gobi Desert's different than the Negev, different from the Sahara, and so forth. In what ways are some of the deserts different?
So what our solutions can offer are not only for deserts, it could also offer to markets in the US or other countries, like I mentioned. And once I give you some examples, just even infrastructure, certain materials that reduce temperature in the surface. For example, a car, you can put a surface on top of it that reduces the temperature. That's something you can use in global markets, but it's inspired by the desert. And that's why it's still Desertech. So the market could be worldwide. But in terms of the differences, in terms of Desertech, in terms of deserts, one of the advantages of the Negev is that you also have a lot of microclimates. So probably won't include all the microclimates of all the deserts in the world, but companies could come to the Negev, which is a friendly desert in the sense that you have access to infrastructure, R&D, health services, 1 hour drive from the airport, international airport. So you have a very, very friendly desert with many microclimates where you can test your technology and then you can bring it to other deserts around the world. So it kind of like a soft landing to other deserts. And so I think that's one of the value propositions that the Negev has to offer.
And maybe can you define what a microclimate is? What does that mean?
So it's within the same climate, you have different, for example, altitudes or temperatures or types of soil, and all these things will define the climate. And you can't compare the climate. We talk about the Negev, we have the area surrounding the Gaza Strip where you do have fertile lands and most of Israel's produce is being grown there. And it could, in certain times, you think you're in the Mediterranean. It's more of a greener area. You have Mitzpe Ramon, which is high on the hills. And then you can have you can have the Arava, which is a completely different desert landscape.
Okay, great. The Mirage Foundation prepared a very nice presentation. And on one page of that presentation, you have 4 different categories of desert tech. One is extreme climates. Perhaps you can first tell us if people can access this presentation on your website or email you. And then secondly, if you can maybe, let's talk a little bit about some of the technologies that you're working with relative to extreme climates.
Sure. So maybe I'll say when we decided as the Mirage Foundation to focus on desert tech and seeing how we can create this sector and make it a growth engine in the Negev, we joined forces with an entity called the Israeli Innovation Institute, and they have a model for innovation communities. So what we did is we created a community, and what that means is that we connect without a fee, because we're nonprofit, obviously. We connect between researchers, startups, investors, and we created several tools, including the presentation that you mentioned. So people can log into desertech.org, and there you'll find also this presentation. You'll find the desert tech landscape with information about all the startups in Israel dealing with these challenges, a lot of more in-depth description of what are these most salient challenges, and a desert tech marketplace where you could actually log into and find the startups per stage, early stage, developed, if they're in which industry, water, agri-tech, energy, infrastructure. So investors can really utilize these tools that we developed, and we're happy to connect investors with deal flow opportunities or startups with investors. It's the kind of work that we do on a day-to-day basis, done by the Desert Tech team. Yeah, so what was your other question?
Yeah, maybe we could talk a little bit about some of the technologies that are being developed relative to extreme climates.
Mm-hmm. So what we did when we decided to focus on Desert Tech was first to understand what is Desert Tech? What are the challenges? And we narrowed it down together with the professors at the Ben Gurion University of the Negev into 4 main categories: extreme climates, water scarcity and availability, land degradation, and remote and marginal living, meaning communities that are off grid in the middle of the desert. How can you support them without having to create now a whole, highway reaching them? So, and we've mapped all the startups working around those, providing solutions to those 4 challenges. So, for example, around extreme climates, there's an example called Salicrop company that enables the crops that live in saline soils. We were talking about the soils in the Negev and a lot of the deserts. The water that is underneath the surface is very saline. And so Salicrops develops, this enables the crops to become resilient to the high temperature, being able to grow under scarcity of water. So that's Salicrop. Another example, not from the agri-tech, but from the energy, SolCold, which is what I was mentioning before. It's really this thin layer that can coat desert structures like cars or buildings from direct sun, and it transform, and don't ask me how, because this is a super developed technology, transform the solar rays into a cooling mechanism. It cools up the surface and it can reduce at least 10 degrees Celsius without the need for energy. So imagine in the future, cars, not only in the desert, but in cities that are suffering from extreme temperature, could be using this technology, and then you don't have to use as much air conditioning, the same as buildings, office buildings, schools, hospitals. So that's... Yeah.
I'm sorry, what was the name of that company?
It's called SolCold.
SolCold. Okay. And the other one, Salicrop. What kind of crops does that help grow in saline water?
I think it can help any crop, because the solution is not on the crops itself, it's the mechanism that allows them to live on the soils.
Okay. All right, great.
On water scarcity, there's a startup called Astera, and they developed on Ben-Gurion University, they developed a satellite-based leak detection. They can find the leaks. By the way, this is also that has other usage beyond desert on cities' infrastructures. But they can also detect soil moisture types below the ground. They can identify, for example, if you have underneath water sources in deserts. And this is a satellite that can really identify.
Interesting. Okay.
It's called Astera.
Okay, great. All right. Any technologies or companies you want to talk about relative to land degradation?
Yeah. So, for example, there's a company called DOTS, DOTS, that it's a sensor that actually monitors the use of fertilizers and nutrients in cultivated soils. So what happens is that if you don't really have a way to measure how much fertilizers you put, you can over fertilize, and then you're actually causing pollution and increase, spends by the farmers. So this is a monitor that really tells you the exact optimal need for fertilizers, and helps increase the yield and optimize irrigation as well.
Yeah, it seems very important now because fertilizer costs have gone up so much that I would imagine farmers would appreciate being able to economize on their use of fertilizers. Does the Mirage Foundation, or do some of these companies get funding from large companies such as Israel Chemicals? Was there a connection there?
So Israel Chemicals, HIL, is actually the largest employer in the Negev. They're very much involved in the ecosystem. They're involved, I would say, depending in our marketplace. You can see which startups have been funded. Some are very early stage. The Mirage Foundation doesn't fund specific startups, but what we do is really try to connect those startups with investors. ICL has an innovation side, and we try to work with them, or Netafim. Netafim is probably the world's largest irrigation company, and they're also based in the Negev. So they're also a big growth engine, and they are constantly trying to see what's out there for new technologies that they can support as well. And the last maybe startup that I wanted to mention around remote living is a company called Solid. It's a water tech company. And it's like this little, it's a water purification device that is solar powered. So we can actually purify the water if you're in a remote community. All the water streams that go through it get purified by UV light.
Okay, that's another very interesting company. Does the Mirage Foundation work with maybe similar organizations in other deserts, like in the Mojave Desert or wherever? Is there an alliance of Mirage type organizations that represent other deserts throughout the world?
So what we're trying to do is working with the United Arab Emirates. Last year, we launched our Mirage Desertech competition in Dubai. And we've been since, the Desertech community was launched 2 years ago. So it's a relatively new initiative. But since then, we've already been able to reach dozens of companies and similar entities, kind of chambers of commerce or entities similar to Mirage in the way that are interested in finding solutions for regions. And we host dozens of delegations that come to the Negev that want to know more. Like I said, we have competitions, global competitions. We held last year, we brought 20 companies from Holland and the UK. So you would, and they even spoke in our event and they say, we know, why would the UK and Holland be interested in Desertech? But the answer is, on the one hand, yes, they're also interested in desert markets. So they also want to see how they can adapt their own technologies to be able to support those markets, but also because they're experiencing these problems themselves in their own countries. They have these huge water shortage, droughts and extreme temperatures. So they're also interested in incorporating some of these technologies themselves. So I would say for the most part, countries that have deserts tend to be developing countries. And unfortunately, they don't have the ecosystem like the Negev has in terms of solutions, but in terms of problems, in terms of us really being able to provide those solutions to those deserts, that's exactly what we're trying to do. And so for the most part, we're also working with developing countries and also with developed countries, each one with different needs. Some of them are corporate, some of them are startups, some of them are countries that want to connect. We're also in touch with the UNCCD, the United Nations Agency to Combat Desertification. And we're also working, exploring with them ways that we can join forces on an initiative called the Great Green Wall, which is exactly what you're asking. How can we, and that it's an initiative led by the United Nations to stop the growth of the Sahara Desert, the expansion of the desert, and try to create this green wall that brings prosperity and food security to the communities there. And so we're trying to work with them and seeing how we can bring some of these technologies there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was in London one time, and there was a sandstorm. And I didn't know in London, I didn't know if the local people were joking around with me, but there really was concern that sand was blowing from Africa. So yeah, that was very surprising to me. I live outside of Phoenix, and it's a very well-developed city. Don't really see the desert, but we do have warnings all the time that you shouldn't drive between these hours because there's expected to be a sandstorm. So it is a real thing. Now, you mentioned some of the like the UN initiatives in Europe. Can Israeli companies get funding from the Central Bank of Europe, or the Development Bank of Europe, or whatever it's called, or the UN, or is there money there for Israeli companies to pursue?
So that's a really interesting question. I've been a lot in the field of international development when I used to live in Colombia. And unfortunately, Israelis are not as aware of these grants that are being provided by international development banks. We've seen a very low rate of Israelis applying for this compared to other countries like Singapore or Holland. that have also technologies. So this is also something we want to increase awareness. What they are encouraging is also joint programs between European or Mediterranean countries and Israeli, or joint research programs, and that's growing more and more. And so every one of the works that we're doing at the Desertech community is every time there's a call for participation or a funding opportunity, we have a monthly newsletter, and so we put it all there, and we have a community of about 2,000 recipients that can really get in one place all the information relevant to that. So that's also those who join, visit our website can register to our newsletter.
Okay. Just last night on LinkedIn, I saw a video about Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. They have a very nice video of what they intend to do with a desertification project. They intend to have a beautiful park. It's like maybe 5 times the size of Central Park.
Wow.
A very, very ambitious goal. So from other podcasts we've had, there are ways for Israelis to get involved in projects like that. So there's a lot of opportunity in the Middle East, of course. I forgot to ask this before, but what are some of the towns south of Beersheba in the Negev, some of the smaller emerging towns?
So you have Arad, Ofakim, Mitzpe Ramon, Sderot near the border with Gaza, Dimona, which is positioning itself as a Industry 4.0 place. You have in the Arava more like kibbutzim nearby, and then the southern point is Eilat, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And you have an up-and-coming town called Yerucham with a mayor who's a female mayor, very young, very, very innovation-prone. They are positioning themselves as the medical cannabis town, and they're also doing some really interesting things on drones. It's called Yerucham. They just actually have a lake now, and they want to create a lot of tourism around that. It's kind of like an oasis in the middle of the desert. And they also have their Machtesh, which is a crater. There's 2 Machtesh, 2 craters, one near Mitzpe Ramon and one near Yerucham. And so there's also a lot of opportunities at the intersection of innovation and tourism. People want to go and see, how you're growing cherry tomatoes or grapes, or how you can sleep in the middle of the desert but still have, vineyards. This is also a huge project that Mirage is involved, which is making the Negev the top desert wine destination. And so we're working with 30, 40 wine growers growing vineyards in the middle of the desert. I'll tell you a short story. I know we're running out of time. We took 13 wineries from the Negev to Piemonte, Italy, for them to learn how they make wine in Italy and how they host groups, how they do tourism, wine tourism. And so we took them and we visited winery after winery. And every time, I introduced them and I said, here's a delegation of wine growers from Israel's desert, they would stop us and say, wait, you're coming from the desert and you're growing wine? And this is so, I need to hear you. You don't have to hear me, because in 20, 30 years, I have no idea how to grow my vineyards without irrigation. We need to learn from you. So that's an example of some of these up and coming industries that the Negev is leading and that the world unfortunately will need more and more.
So you think other crops can grow in the desert too, besides grapes?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Most of Israel's produce is grown in the Negev. Avocados, obviously dates, but because you also have greenhouses and indoor farming, then you can grow anything. In all of the Gaza Strip area outside, like the border, that's where you have also some of the largest fields, potatoes, anything, all the produce.
Okay. All right. Well, this was great. Are there any concluding comments you have or any final points you'd like to make?
I think maybe what I've learned in this process is really how scarcity brings innovation and makes us think outside the box. And it's really it's an honor to be able to feel like we're fulfilling Ben Gurion's dream. And the people that are in the Negev are really pioneers. Everyone that goes there and decides to move forward, build their business there are really pioneers. And we invite everyone to come and visit and do business there and find us online for solutions.
Great, thank you. Just the last question. How far south does the train go? And secondly, the fast highway, is it Highway 5? How far south does that go?
I think that the highway, the 6 itself, only is until Beersheba. From Beersheba onwards, then you have to take other routes. The train, there's a train that goes either to Beersheba or on the western side near the Gaza border, Ofaki, Sderot and Netivot. But you don't have a train that goes to Mitzpe Ramon that are more the tourism sites. That is something that the Negev leaders have been pushing for. I don't know if there are plans to expand it. I believe there are. But the other thing that is that is very important is that the Ramon Airport near Eilat was launched, and it's a very nice airport. And even though it's still quite far from Beersheba, it's better to go from Ben Gurion Airport than Ramon. But we could hope that there will be an influx of a lot of tourists coming from the Ramon area to Eilat, but also north to some of the other Negev towns.
Okay, thank you very much, Nicole. We very much appreciate you spending all this time with us and educating us on the Negev and desert technology. It was a very interesting session.
Thank you so much for hosting us.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Okay, thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.